Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for attending our fifth webinar. During the last few months, we've conducted a number of webinar series where we've discussed various topics on Workday projects, from integrations to how COVID-19 specifically has affected the Workday ecosystem. The format of this webinar is going to be, I've got two guests with me today, which I'm going to introduce in a moment. We're going to have three specific topics that we're going to discuss. And I'd urge the audience to ask as many questions via the Q&A, which is available on the webinar, and we can get the guests to answer as many as we possibly can. So without further ado, introducing Mr. Rob Jordan and Todd Murray from Snowgoose. Can you give the attendees, for the benefit of the attendees, just give a quick 30, 45 second overview of yourselves individually? Todd, you go first.
Sure. My name's Todd Murray. Originally, of course, you can tell from my posh California accent, I'm not from Europe, but I started back in '97 with PeopleSoft. I guess it's been all these years. So did that for a few years based out of Amsterdam, then went freelance and did PeopleSoft work all over Europe, and then transitioned into Workday eventually. A few years of SuccessFactors thrown in there a little bit, but I've been working on global deployments for specifically Workday test management since 2014. Deploying projects, EMEA, APAC, North, South America. I've been all over the place. So really specifically focused on Workday test management.
Yeah. And we've placed you a few times, haven't we, Todd, on various testing roles for clients.
Yeah, we go back.
You've done a great job.
Yeah.
And Rob?
Thank you very much indeed. So I've been delivering IT projects for best part of 25 years. My background is also testing, and I started out as a UAT tester way back when, and then moved through various levels of test leadership and management, and moved into Workday around about the same time as Todd did, actually. And we then started Snowgoose in 2017. So we did that based on a lot of delivery experience that we had, but also really just thinking there's a slightly better way to do things. And so we've kind of baked that into the heart of how we approach projects and how we help clients achieve success when they're setting up to deliver projects.
It's almost like forming Dream Team, isn't it, you two? Looking at your backgrounds.
It could be seen that way. We'd never say such a thing.
Let's move on to topic one. And we're going to spend a little bit less time on this one because we have covered this in various other webinars before. But I want to talk about what a customer needs to do to prepare for success in their Workday project.
Sure. Shall I make a start on that one?
Yeah.
So absolutely. For anyone who's been watching as we have on the previous webinars, I think aspects of this have been covered. And although we don't want to be prescriptive here, we'll make this a bit of I suppose, an open conversation and throw in a bit of experience that we have had. But this one really depends upon where you are in that journey. And so if you are in RFP or you're in P0, our advice would be, and how we work with customers in that position, is to bake as much delivery experience as you can into that setup. And what I mean by that is, I'm taking a specifically test management flavor here, is maybe having a look at the experience of other projects that have been delivered and where their successes and challenges have been. And in particular, we like to make that metrics driven and estimate driven as well. So for all of the projects and all of the clients that we have delivered, we've got great insights into the numbers, and the numbers are what help us to make better decisions. And I think we may be able to talk about that a little bit later on in as we jump into metrics and stuff a bit deeper about test management. But really, I suppose the two things that leap out for customers that we work with in that position is fold in the delivery experience as best you can, and also look at the dependencies that are placed on the customer organization for things that need to be ready or things that need to be true to make that project plan a success. So that's the first thing I guess I would say. What I would say just a little bit later than that, I mean, getting to the P0 and actually getting into project initiation, one of the things that continues to crop up is methodology. And is the choice of methodology. And again, you know, we can fold in a lot of test experience here as well. And this also depends on the size of customer as well. The majority of our experience has been global organizations, and we tend to deliver into lots of countries and multiple regions at the same time. So different time zones and, you know, upwards of 80 countries at a time, delivering large scale change. And it becomes quite interesting. It certainly keeps you on your toes. But methodology is a critical piece for a customer to understand. And so particular here, I think for global customers, the majority of them will have their own project delivery methodologies. They may also have their own internal quality assurance processes and internal controls. So some of the organizations that we work with can be heavily regulated, be that in pharma, for example, oil and gas are others as well. So there are not just legal frameworks and regulatory frameworks, but there also tends to be quite tight internal control on how a project can and should be delivered. And so when you bring a Workday methodology to the doorstep of that organization, and depending on the partner, the certified partner that is chosen to deliver Workday, they will have their own flavors of a delivery methodology as well. For the most part, they are agile. But some of that challenge comes from trying to meld that methodology with an internal customer methodology. And in some cases, these large organizations will also have teams and systems that have been around for years, will have their own internal controls and methodologies and more of a waterfall type approach. And so one of the very first things that we tend to recommend is some form of methodology adoption workshop. And getting that alignment early on is going to be critical, because what it helps to do is start to inform the teams that need to be engaged and where those teams cross over. And for the most part, in test management and test delivery and what we see in test phases, one of the key messages that we like to put across there is that testing is a measurement service. So as I said, we've been doing testing for years and years, got the scars, had some better and some worse experiences. But what it teaches you, I mean, one of the reasons that we actually stepped out into project and program management as well, is that it's managing the upstream dependencies and managing those upstream intersections where those work streams come together. And so again, I suppose one of the biggest lessons learned that we've got from trying to align those upstream dependencies to get them into a test phase would be the alignment of configuration, data, and integrations. And if you get that milestone right in your plan, the rest of it becomes a little bit simpler.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, that's the stuff that tends to spill over into those test phases. So, so really, I suppose the key message for me there in setting up for success and giving it that kind of test management flavor is deliberately choose your methodology, and whether you're going to stick with the methodology that is brought to your doorstep, or you're going to meld it with one that you have internally with those other controls as well. Do that in a very deliberate way.
Yeah, it's interesting you ask about you mentioned about that, Rob, because I know the way that you implement Workday is somewhat in a different way that you would implement other products, of course. So in your opinion, is there a correct methodology? You're talking about options for methodology of a project. In your opinion, is there a correct way to go And does that impact which way you choose, which methodology you choose, depending on the size of the business?
It's a really interesting question, and I think for medium, small enterprise and small businesses, I think it may be easier to adopt the partner methodology as they bring it, because they do have the experience and they do have the guidance. Those methodologies as well, that you've got to see them in context. So they are frameworks, essentially, and they do have a little bit of flex built into them, and it's why they are agile in nature, because each organization is different. Yeah. And I mean that from a technical perspective, so technical landscape and the geographic spread and the systems and architectural landscape will be different organization to organization, as well as the kind of the governance and the controls that go around that as well, where the stakeholders and decision makers are. And so no methodology is a perfect fit straight out of the box. You know, you do need to apply experience, you do need to apply logic, but you also have to keep a little bit of that flex to allow for some of the conditions on the ground, and the reality of what that organization looks like and where their challenges are. What I would say, I suppose, again, with a test management flavor, is that where we have seen most success and where we have seen projects deliver smoothly and on time and ticking off those milestones in a calm and controlled way, tends to be where we actually plug in some of that testing thinking up front. So actually having a methodology, but also having a test strategy that is proven and allows the project plan to move through those gateways in a more measured and controlled way, they tend to be the projects that have the most success more quickly. And one last point with that, I guess, is in particular what I'm thinking about is when you get to prototype review, and that prototype review comes after the engagement with business resources to give their requirements, for the teams to go away and do design, for that design to be broken down into configuration workbooks and data workbooks, and for those then to be reviewed and implemented in the tenant. Sorry if that's a bit technical, but I mean, these are the kind of steps that have to happen upstream. What we have found is that re-engaging those business resources to have them step through some functional testing of Workday at that point in time has multiple benefits that you simply won't get any other way. And what that allows us to do is to create a set of test scenarios that makes it a bit more real. So those playback sessions can be, I mean, they are fantastic and they give everyone a view of the future. But what we have found is, and because there is such a heavy reliance on business resources who maybe don't have a lot of project delivery experience, they don't have a lot of test experience, they've also got a day job, they can sit in those demonstration sessions and see what's going on, and it looks fantastic. But it is only really when they get hands-on and think, what does this mean for my day job? Having structured testing in that way with entry criteria, with a set of test scenarios that exercise the configuration and the data as it's available at that point in time, what that does is give you a really solid bedrock. So I mentioned a little bit earlier on about that intersection between configuration and data and integrations, and the integration design in particular I'm thinking about there before that integration build can happen. Nailing your configuration early and having those stakeholders exercise it and sign off against it gives you a really stable Workday tenant from which all other change can be made. And so, to come back to your question, I'm sorry that was a bit of a long story maybe. There is no perfect one-size-fits-all, but there is experience that you can fold in, and there is not just the melding of methodologies, but also starting with the end in mind and mitigating some of those risks early on in a measured and structured way is where we've seen the most success.
Yeah, thanks for that, Rob. We've got quite a few questions coming in thick and fast, so I want to move on to those questions real quick. But let me ask you a quick question. How important, in your opinion, is it for an end user to bring in a test manager or someone who knows about Workday or testing within Workday? And at what point would you do that, in your opinion?
Todd, do you want to grab that one?
Yeah, sure. Testing, unfortunately, frequently, it doesn't get engaged until later on in the process.
Yeah.
We absolutely recommend getting testing in early.
Yeah.
What people don't realize is they think we don't need a test manager just yet. We're not ready for testing. But actually, test prep happens all the way back into the phases Rob's mentioning. Back at the foundation of setting up your project and doing methodology adoption workshops, having test management involved early in the planning process and working closely with the project manager is fundamentally critical to the project success. Because if a test manager is in there from the beginning, you're taking it through all the way through to cutover and eventually handing it over to the cutover teams and then into hypercare and delivery afterwards and post-production. But getting in early and setting that foundation is critical, especially when it comes back to what Rob was mentioning about the alignment between data integrations and test. You need to get those teams working together early so you can understand the dependencies between the work streams. Otherwise, like Rob was mentioning earlier, if you don't, when the reality hits the customer, it can happen too late in the process. In P2, in the prototype 2, they get into end-to-end testing, and that's when the wake-up call happens, and they think, oh, why didn't we flush this out earlier? What didn't come to the table? So I would recommend, as early as possible, engaging test management.
Yeah. There's been a couple of projects where we've actually placed you on, haven't there, Todd? And the need for a test manager has come a little bit too late, so you have to go through backlog of stuff, yeah. And it's really important to get your testing team set up right from the beginning. Absolutely. Yeah. So I'll move on to some of the questions here. We've got some really good ones here. Some of our attendees have been rather nasty to you two here.
Love it. Great.
So, question one. When do you expect to start the cutover planning in the project lifecycle for a Workday implementation? Months or weeks before testing phases commence, or something else, or question mark?
That's an interesting one. I wonder, does that come from a cutover manager? So, a little bit like testing. I don't think it's ever too early to start to make assumptions about what you're going to do for cutover. And so way back at that method adoption workshop, it would make sense to use somebody with cutover experience to think about the activities that need to be built and sharing those dependencies. So when I talked about methodology, for example, and talked about the alignment of those work streams, cutover is clearly a work stream, a little bit like testing, that has huge dependencies on everything that has gone before. And whilst testing essentially is that measurement service and tells you your progress through the plan, and it tells you the quality of what you have delivered, cutover will look backwards for those dependencies, but also needs to look forward to deliver not just the technology piece, but also needs to have ties into change management and training and adoption, and some of the more business-centric stuff too. So we would recommend always for all work streams, straight after that method adoption workshop, what they should really do is build a work stream charter. And that workstream charter works really well for us, because what it allows us to do is outline the milestones for a particular workstream. It allows us to outline the approach that that workstream will take, and it allows us to name dependencies both into that workstream and out of that workstream elsewhere. And so building in that cutover strategy right at the outset, I think, is absolutely critical. Right? And I know that that doesn't directly answer that question, but how I would interpret that question is actually more about when do you start the detailed cutover activities, so the planning and the execution of that cutover piece. So again, I would expect that should start no later than where the around about where system integration test end to end kind of have that juncture. And at that point in time, it should be able to pick up what has happened and what has been specified in that workstream charter in the high level plan, and then start to detail that out more. Because we tend to be quite agile, and we shift from agile to a waterfall type methodology and type approach as you get further through that plan. That tends to happen around about where Workday gets stable and where the configuration has been baselined, because all of those other teams that you need to work with, like training, like change management, and the adoption piece that happens in there as well. Cutover, I would absolutely put into that space as well. That has its own methodology and its own structure that you need to go through. And although there is input to how cutover should happen with Workday, from Workday and from the certified partners as well, there is also industry-wide best practice as well, and specifics to that client that need to be picked up. So yeah, I wouldn't leave it. I wouldn't leave it to weeks. I would give yourself months, because again, depending on size and complexity of the organization, there may be some surprises waiting that you need to flush out early. I hope that's answered that effectively.
Great answer. I hope that answers your question. Next question here, I can actually answer this myself. Do you need to have a project management certification to be able to manage a Workday implementation? The simple answer to that is the project managers from the certified partner would have EM certifications, but a project manager on the customer side does not need to have a certification to manage a Workday implementation. Would you guys agree with that statement? Can I move on after that?
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, it's actually very rare to have a project manager for an end user that has that Workday project management certification, because it's not available for end users. There is certifications that you can achieve as an end user, so your teams can go on Workday training, but those certifications are different from what the certified partners have access to.
Indeed, short answer, no. What you do need is a lot of experience. What you do need is objectivity, and what you will find is that a lot of the problems, challenges, interesting lives that you have delivering Workday, a lot of organizations will think that these problems are unique to them, and they tend not to be. You know, they tend to be things that you will see again and again, and they're not necessarily specifically related to Workday. So for me, a very strong project manager who understands governance and control and reporting and stays calm under pressure is probably the most important set of traits that a customer can look for when deploying Workday.
Would you advise a customer? So a customer that's just bought Workday, just starting their Workday implementation, selected their partner. How important would you say that it's a customer should get a project manager with Workday experience, with of course all of those soft skills traits that you mentioned there?
Grab them if you can. Absolutely grab them if you can. There is one of the challenges and then I guess benefits for us, being a little bit selfish about it, is that there's not an abundance of fantastic resources with a lot of experience, and so if you spot one, grab one and don't let them go.
Yeah, good answer. This question's going back to methodology. Other than the importance of getting the methodology correct, what are the typical mistakes or assumptions new customers about to start their Workday implementation make?
We don't need testing until later. That comes up very frequently. We'll talk about onboarding test teams or test managers when we get to testing. So that's an early one. Rob, anyone from you?
I would say one of the things that we lean back on quite heavily and this is whether we are engaged to do test management or whether we're engaged to do project and program management. One of the key tools that we lean back on is estimation. And having a robust estimation model, I think, is critical, because at the heart of what we do, it's numbers, and those assumptions that you make, they need to be measured in some way, and they need to have some form of measurable outcome. And so absolutely, as part of that method adoption and as part of the project initiation, we will gather as many of those assumptions as we can do, and the high-level planning at the 50,000-foot view is done. But as quickly as you can, and I think I mentioned that earlier, baking in some of that delivery experience and doing that in a measured and controlled way using numbers and actual experience of and being able to tell stories of what's happened elsewhere is crucially important. And we don't see that everywhere, to be quite blunt about it. And so it tends to be one of our secret weapons, I suppose, if you will, is being able to bring that view to the table. So although absolutely it's an agile methodology and it needs flex and you need an ability to kind of move through it, when you start to look outwards at the dependencies that you've got on target operating model, if you look at the organization, if the client or the customer is going through some form of reorg as well, being able to see the impact of the effort that you think you're going to expend at a person or a role level in each of the phases that you're going to put into that plan, it becomes critically important, because what we do find is that if they are unmeasured, where that comes out is when you start your measurement service, and that measurement service is testing. And for the most part, testing seems to start a little bit later than we would recommend. So estimate it early, good strong PM, good strong test manager, good strong data and integration technical leads, good strong configuration leads from the partners, good strong cutover and change management leads on the customer side, and you've got yourself a winning team and a chance of real success.
We got questions coming thick and fast here, so I want to try and get through as many as I possibly can. And many of these questions, for the benefit of the audience, many of these questions are things that we was going to talk about in topic 2. So I think what we should do, guys, if it's okay with you, I think we should skip topic 2, which is all about test management, because it seems to me that all of the questions that are coming through from the attendees are about test management. So I think we're going to be going over the existing stuff, and we can almost phase over into testing. With the ongoing pressure on partners to deliver Workday faster, what's your view on testing everything and go live later, or test the common features and go live earlier? And to follow on, if a client who is used to testing every nut and bolt, how do you persuade them that they need to take a different approach?
Right. I mean, I can talk a little bit about this. This is where testing's a measurement. It's all about identifying and flushing out the risk, right? So if the client wants to skip certain areas because they're comfortable, they think it works once, that's it. We can test it once and move on. It's all about just measuring it and assessing the risk on that functionality. If it's a global process and it's been tested once, it hasn't been changed, you can put a lower priority on it, but just maybe run through one test in the next cycle. But it's all about assessing that risk. What is the business criticality of that business process? So if you're going to go into another test phase, but you know it's a critical business process, and you're deciding to skip that test, that's something as a test manager I'd be calling out, because it's not my job necessarily to go in and as a test manager, you're not fixing the application. You're just measuring the risk and calling it out and making sure those metrics are transparent and visible, so that you can inform that decision to the project management. Then they can make a good informed decision. But I tend to get a little nervous whenever someone wants to speed up And I totally get it. There's a business purpose to speed up a methodology, speed up an implementation. You want to get in and quick, but you just need to assess the risk and make sure you're making the right decisions and there's no adverse impacts.
Usually, if you do things too fast, you end up going back over old stuff, right?
It's going to come back on you sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. What would you do if you had a recommendation on the project and you was like, we can't move on from this. We've got to get this. This needs to work. And you knew that the project manager was suggesting that you should move forward with the next phase of the project, and you just thought, this is not a good idea. Apart from recommending that they shouldn't, would there ever be a case where you would halt? Literally, we're not going any further because this is going to be a problem later on.
Well, from a test management perspective, we can only provide the analysis, the metrics, and the recommendation. Yeah. And then you have to follow the process. There's an escalation path that you have on every project. And you have to follow the escalation path and say, we've called this out. We've identified the risk. These are the potential impacts downstream. And then you can work with the other work streams to give their impact assessments. But if the project manager decides to push on, ultimately that's their call and their responsibility. But you've called it out as a test manager.
Which I guess is probably why it's really important to have someone internally managing the project that knows, who's done a Workday implementation before.
That's right.
Have you ever been on a project before, Todd, where you got a project manager? You know where I'm going with this, don't you? Have you ever been on a project before where you may have a very, very good project manager, who's done other implementations for 10 years plus, but never done a Workday implementation, and you're the test guy on the project. That project manager's recommended that you move forward with something that doesn't work. Have you ever been in a scenario like that, and what did you do about it?
I haven't been in a scenario exactly like that, but I haven't been in a scenario where it was a new project manager, first time on a Workday project. I was fortunate enough to have him look to me for guidance rather than push on.
Yeah.
So when I started calling out risk, I would pull him aside and say, look, here's the metrics, here's the data, here's all the supporting information. I've seen this before. I know what's going to happen downstream if we continue to push on. We need to take a pause, reset, and do a risk assessment. And he was fortunate enough, he took the advice. Yeah. But I've been, I guess, lucky enough not to be in that position where somebody inexperienced was pushing forward.
Good.
Can I add in, I suppose, an addendum maybe to that? Just go back to the original question too. I think consideration also needs to be given to the fact that you don't need to test vanilla Workday. You don't need to approach testing in a way that you would where you're building a bespoke system from the ground up. And the great thing, the flexibility that cloud products like Workday bring is that the core product is tested within an inch of its life, and it is stable, and it does what it's supposed to do. And so where you need to focus, like Todd absolutely rightly nailed, is risk. And those risk areas tend to be driven by areas of localization in configuration, and also where maybe a legacy payroll system is staying in place, but Workday is replacing whatever solutions were in place for HR and being the master of the data. And you've then also got a consideration of whether you are deploying globally, whether you are partially configuring things locally in countries or even in particular teams or functions within countries, and also what the test phase is trying to achieve. So what we try to do with our test phases is to build in the foundations at the start and leave ourselves with some flexibility as we get towards the back end. So we do a little bit of I suppose that foundational testing from a configuration perspective, which then enables you to move forward with data and integrations, and then allows you to move into an acceptance type phase later on, be that a full technical end-to-end test or be that some kind of service rehearsal test too. And the outcomes of those things are different. And so from an end-to-end perspective, yes, you should be testing all of those localizations that you have made, and particularly where they are payroll impacting, because the primary risk that you're trying to mitigate is getting people paid the right amount on time. And luckily we've had quite a lot of success in that. But then also from a service rehearsal perspective, you're also trying to then bed in the HR and manager and employee experience and enable them also to make decisions about local process documentation, about knowledge articles, about how that system is going to be used and how the team will start to operate on day one. So you don't need to test everything, but you should actually focus on localization. You should focus on business need, and you should also take real consideration of what you're trying to achieve with that particular test phase, or indeed what it is that you need to go live with first. Tom, target operating model is what I mean by that.
Hence why I've just asked Paul there. I wanted to make sure that's what he meant.
Indeed. I hope that answers the question too.
Yeah. What's the biggest challenge you face working with implementation partners, and how do you go about overcoming these?
The biggest challenge, that's an interesting one.
Yeah.
It's different. I think it's different from partner to partner, and I think it's different from customer to customer. But the point that I was making earlier on, I don't think any of those problems are unique. So I wouldn't, and I'm sure this wasn't the intention of the question, I wouldn't single out any of the partners to say there are particular challenges with that particular partner. But it tends to come back down to people. It comes down to people, and it comes down to experience, essentially, and the experience that those people are bringing to the table, and the work streams that they're operating in. And I think we touched upon this a little bit earlier on as well, in that there is whilst there are some brilliant, absolutely top-notch professionals who have tons of experience delivering Workday, there's also a lot of people who may be coming into the ecosystem, who may be transitioning from other partners, or they may be transitioning from other technology stacks and starting off, and that's different. So I think every project brings its own challenges, but I think it just comes down to people and experience, and then how you react to that and how you bolster that when you see those challenges arise. And a lot of that comes back to maybe some of the soft skills and the relationships that you build with project and program management and steerco, and also the relationships that you build with those partners too. So we have got fantastic relationships with a lot of brilliant people and a lot of brilliant partners. And that tends to be one of those things that we kind of, you look past the brand and you look at the people that you're delivering with, and you tend to bump into them a lot too, which is really good.
Yeah, some really good people that many
yeah,
of really so.
And people make projects. I mean, we've got methodologies, we've got partners, we've got freelancers, there's contractors, boutiques, but ultimately it's the people who make the project.
Yeah, we've got an interesting question here. I'm not going to mention clients, but there's obviously someone on here that is aware of your backgrounds. And they ask, can you share experience on defect management for two particular projects that you've been on with all the participants based on your experience? I've read that a little bit wrong there, but can you share your experience in defect management?
Yeah, I can talk to defect management. Now, defect management was something that I learned a little bit after getting into Workday testing. And originally I thought, okay, defect management, that's when, okay, we get a bug, we've got something wrong, we'll put it in a log. But once you start getting into the science of defect management, it's really an absolutely crucial part of the project, especially in test management. Because defect management is not just about recording the defects, recording an anomaly in the configuration that you found. It's about assessing that risk that's behind the defect. And so having proper defect management in place, I can't emphasize that enough, because specifically a defect manager on a project, especially a global deployment, somebody that can properly assess and manage a defect process through the organization, because there's a lot of different players involved. You've got defect severities, you've got criticalities to business processes. The defect needs to be analyzed, triaged, properly documented, and you have to have proper defect tools in place, whether it's JIRA, ALM, or however you're managing your defect management tool. But it needs to be in place. And defect management is the management that's going to call out that data, those metrics, and flag up all those risks, saying, we've had 1 out of 2 tests fail, or this is the severity of these defects. These are the defects in integrations or functional, or all across the organization. But it's absolutely critical to have defect management in place.
Yeah. That question actually came from Sakti.
Oh, hey, Sakti.
Who you both,
we know Sakti well.
You both worked with at GSK and Sanofi.
Yes, indeed. No, Sakti well. We spent some good time in Singapore with Sakti as well, as well as London. I suppose I could just add on to that one a little bit as well. I think everything Todd said there is absolutely spot on. And this was onto one of the topics, aspects of the topics that we were going to talk about is metrics. And defect management absolutely is a specialism and does need particular focus from an experienced test and or defect manager, because what it does is generate lots of numbers, and what it can also do is generate a lot of fear and a lot of noise. And so getting that defect management process right and understanding what it's telling you is critical, absolutely critical, because it's not just about how you manage tests and how you manage resources back on the ground and how you manage work streams to resolve those defects, be it functional or integrations or data or training or documentation or whatever it is. There is also the fact that the numbers that come out of the defect management process are critical to enable project leadership to make decisions. And but that also goes all the way back down to the ground as well, you know, in terms of, do we have the right training in place for our people in this particular team in this country? You know, and are we seeing a consistency of these types of errors? And so those defects are visible. And a lot of times what we find is that the defects are not actually defects, they can be misunderstanding. And that misunderstanding can either come from not understanding a test scenario, it can come from actually not having the right training in place in the first place. It could be that it needs to go back down into some kind of local action and isn't something for the project to resolve at all. And we are working with a client right now where we've also built a slightly more kind of hybrid process where we are very close to going live. We are moving into a test phase where it's all about people experience on the ground and what that end-to-end process looks like. And so we've built a bit of a shield, if you will, in front of that defect management process that allows us to raise incidents and assess them and understand them before we maybe actually even raise them as a defect. Because when you do get quite late on into the plan, it's confidence that you want to build, and you want to make sure that you are tracking the right things in the right way to allow those decisions to be made. Because things also can escalate out of that defect management process out into the project. You know, that it can go back out into a change forum. You know, some of those things may become change requests, and you've got to make a decision on whether you're going to do something about that now or in the future. If you're going to do something about it now, have you got enough time left in your test phase to bake it back in? You know, can all of the participating teams do an impact assessment and say, this is what it's going to take, and then we can make a decision on how we're going to test that and get it done. If we're going to do that at some point in the future, to Todd's point earlier on, it's all about risk. You know, and can we take the risk of doing this change at a later point in time? If so, do we need a workaround in place? How much is that workaround going to cost us? How many resources is that going to take? How long does that have to run for? And so the measures that we take are much bigger than test. Yeah, this there are program implications, there are cost implications, there are people implications for the business later on as well. And so making sure that you set this up in the right way, you can do the right analysis and the right reporting in a timely way, and then you allow decisions to be made that are based on those numbers, is probably the single most important thing that you can do right at the heart of a Workday project. I'm sorry, I realized it was a bit of a long answer, but hopefully it made sense.
Really good answer. Somebody else here has asked, have you come across a good test automation tool for Workday? And do you think it's worth the cost and the effort on the project versus the post-go-live upgrade testing, time-saving benefits?
Rob?
Yeah, so
I'll pass that one on to you, Rob.
Well, so yes, we've got one. We've got one we built, and yes, it is good. So I've got a bit of a background in automation and implementation of automation as well. And in a past life, what feels like a lifetime ago, we built an automation capability from the ground up. It wasn't Workday at that time, but we built it for a government organization in the UK, and a large government organization in the UK. And then that service partner went and deployed that automation capability around the world for its other customers. And so what I learned from that implementation of building automation from the ground up is that it's going to cost you money whatever way you look at it. You know, it is going to cost you a potentially significant amount of money to implement automation on your project. And you've got to understand why you're doing that implementation. And if you think that you're going to implement it and it's going to save you all the time in the world and everything is going to be rosy, then that is a little bit of a blinkered view. It doesn't quite work like that. And you've also got to think of the outcomes that you're going to achieve. So we do a bit of a hybrid model where we can and do automate tests, but that's more of an assurance activity than it is a delivery activity. And you've also got to think about not just what you're implementing for now, but what your future roadmap looks like as well. So you can have a phase 1, a phase 2, a phase 3 of what you're delivering in your initial project, but you may have a roadmap that's about 10 years long. And so what you've got to give consideration to as well is not just the yearly Workday releases and what a regression capability could look like and how you plug that into change management. You've also got to look at the kind of the fixes that you might want to deploy through BAU, either when projects are still ongoing or after your projects are done. You might want to look at small change and then kicking off larger projects as well, and the benefit of actually having a full regression suite in place looks like. Because if you can actually start to look at those numbers and do that forecast and those projections over a 7 to 10 year lifespan, expected lifespan of what that automation capability can do, it starts to put into context the initial implementation cost. And in many times you are getting, actually all of the time, you are getting a many-fold return on your investment if you do that in the right way. The other consideration that I would give to that is you're also very heavily dependent upon the requirements, the design and the configuration, and getting that nailed as early as you can. So your point of inception of where you bring automation in is also a critical decision. And getting some experience of what that configuration actually looks like embedded in is going to be critical. And I suppose I could tell you a bit of a story about that one. So we, the reason that we built our own automation capability is that for a large client we were working for, just before we built out Snowgoose, we did actually bring in a secondary partner to have a look at building an automation regression capability. But what we found was in trying to specify the tests on unstable configuration, what happened was when those tests went back to local teams for them to review, they said, well, actually, that's not really what we meant. It's these other inputs over here that we wanted for this particular process to make it look like we wanted to. And so there was a bit of chasing of tails trying to get that stability built in. We eventually got there. But we did make a decision at the end of that wave that we would not implement open automation for the third and final wave, simply because of the investment that would have taken at that point in time to rebuild that capability from the ground up, and the forecast that we were doing actually informed that decision. So if you're going to look at automation, think about it long term, think about having that stability built in, and then think about that point of inception and how it plugs into the wider governance processes as well.
Thanks for that, Rob. Just one last question before we go on, and this is by someone who's anonymous. What are the issues a customer could potentially face by allowing the partner to run everything and not advise that a customer needs their own internal Workday expertise? What are the issues that a customer would face without their own Workday expertise internally?
It's an interesting question, I think. Sorry, Todd, if I could have jumped in again. It's an interesting question, but I think mostly a theoretical one, because we don't really see where a partner will take on delivery of everything, and in fact we find it quite the opposite. And so, I mean, right back,
the partners do, in my experience, more and more so now as well. They are advising the end users that you do need these people internally. Yeah, sorry to interrupt you there.
No, you're spot on, and it's for good reason. So, in the old days, back when we were kids, back in my day, when you think about it, I mean, when I was thinking back to that government organisation in the UK and the partner we were working for at that point in time, the partners in those bespoke builds tend to take on a lot more than you would see a partner take on now in a cloud deployment. Yeah. And the skill sets and the disciplines and the work streams tend to be a bit different. I mean, they're the same work streams, obviously, but the demarcation line between where partner stops and customer starts has changed. And what we find is that the demarcation line for cloud deployments, the demarcation line stops earlier, you know, and so when I think about those bespoke system builds, the kind of client server technology and interfacing with old legacy systems in the back end, we're going back to AS400 back end at this point.
I was at school, Rob.
You were at school, indeed, yeah, indeed. And what we found was that actually things like system integration test and end-to-end testing and even acceptance testing was actually specified and built and run by the partners, and then some kind of UAT would normally be taken up by the customer. What we see more and more of, though, is that particularly in these cloud implementations and Workday, and our experience with Workday customers and delivery, is that once the configuration is done and some integration build is done, there needs to be necessarily quite a capable customer team to pick up things like data, like integrations, like test, like change management, project management, and in many cases will then face off to a counterpart in the partner organization. So some of the best practice stuff can be replayed and shared. But if you think about it from the perspective, I mean, here's the other thing we kind of learn about, I've learned from projects, is perspective is a critically important thing. And if you look at these projects from a partner perspective, and if you look at it from a commercial perspective, and you look at it from the perspective that the methodology is not a one-size-fits all and all of those customers are different, you have absolutely got to, this methodology and the hybrid methodologies, it leans on business people to bring that business knowledge to the fore. And those partners cannot be commercially responsible for that internal delivery and how it kind of forks down into various levels of the organization as well, simply because they haven't got the experience. Now, you could make them responsible for that, but I think the amount of learning time that you would need to build into your plan and the cost that you would need to build into your plan could potentially make it prohibitive. So this is not just about landing a tool. this tends to be about organizational change as well, and that absolutely needs the participation of the client and really experienced people sitting on that side or advising as well.
There was a question actually earlier on about change and what you would do when perhaps the customer is not taking on that necessary change that needs to happen when you implement Workday. I think that can be covered in topic 3 or topic 2 now, where we want to talk about what do you do when things don't go to plan, and whatever you've done in your Workday implementation, because it always happens. Not all projects go swimmingly well. There's always perhaps mistakes that have been made. Perhaps there's things that you wouldn't have foreseen, resourcing issues on there. Someone's come out of the team, or partner changes out the particular lead from their end, or whatever it may be. And what do you do? What would be your advice for customers? When things go wrong.
Yeah, I suppose I can speak to that a little bit. I mean, of course, we've never seen anything go wrong on a project, Lloyd. It's always really.
I was going to say it's such a difficult.
It's never happened. But
I think we could probably
hypothetically
within 30 seconds, 45 seconds or so, because nothing ever goes wrong, right?
Yeah. So hypothetically, I mean, when things sometimes don't work out the way they should, don't panic. Like I was saying about people make projects. Don't panic, just stop, breathe, step back, assess the situation. Fall back on, I'm all about data and metrics. So fall back on your data, your metrics. What is it telling you? And what is it telling us about the real risk in the situation? And how bad is it? What can we do to rectify the situation? What teams and resources can we put in place and see how we can move on and just progress and impact assess it? Really, it's a process. And if you go back and follow the process of don't panic, just assess the situation, find out the details of what is the true issue. Is it resources? Is it systematic? Is it configuration? But when it doesn't go right, you just have to step back and go through the process of impact assessment.
Yeah. Can you give me an example of projects perhaps that you've been on in the past where things have not gone to plan?
Yes, we've had projects where we go into end-to-end, and this is where we're testing the end-to-end process from beginning to end. And in the middle, you have integrations falling down, or integration delivery finding out that it's not there. So when you run the process, it doesn't connect the systems, data is not flowing downstream, or the wrong data is not flowing. And so then you have to step back and say, okay, what's going on here? What's the true issue? And this is when it comes back to defect management, getting in the defect manager to say, okay, what are the defects raised, pulling in the functional technical teams to understand the issue. And it usually comes back to that fundamental alignment between test, data, and integrations. Something was missed early on. And so we saw end-to-end testing falling down because of integrations. And frequently, not frequently, but commonly, you'll see end-to-end testing is really when it all flushes out. This is when you start to see everything come out, whether it's a decision that was made in P1 config, whether it's an integration design, or whether it was a miss between somebody truly understanding what they're putting into the data templates, because frequently they're putting data into templates early with they don't have all the guidance. They've got guidance from the partners, but not a lot of functional understanding about the implications of what they're putting into a data template. Their org structure, their roles, their security, the config. And this all starts to fall out in end-to-end testing when you test the full process. Yeah. And so that's what we saw. We saw it falling out, and we traced it all the way back to alignment between test data and integrations from very early on.
Yeah. Was there a test manager involved in that particular project earlier on, or was it one of those scenarios where they should have hired a test manager earlier? Didn't
they had test management early? Well, not early enough, but test management was in there relatively early. Yeah. But test management wasn't involved in those meetings. The test manager wasn't involved in the data and integration meeting because, after all, it's testing. We don't need to involve them yet. We're not into testing. But without testing there to call out, we need alignment between those two work streams. That's where the gap happened. So actually engaging a test manager in functional discussions, even if they're just listening for it, in those meetings between integrations, data, test, get them in early because they can start to hear that alignment, whether it's in place or not, because they know what's going to happen later.
Yeah. Especially if they've got, as we've rightly said, they need to have that Workday experience, and perhaps being in a meeting where you're discussing functional processes would flag up warning signs that, hold on, 2-3 projects ago we did this and this was the outcome. And without that Workday experience, you wouldn't know that.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to detect it.
Yeah.
So I suppose, could I just add on to that one as well? Sorry, I seem to keep adding on to stuff. So advice, absolutely do not set your hair on fire. That doesn't help anyone.
I would if I could, Rob.
Well, my hairstyle is a choice. I've been at too many projects.
Well, maybe I should say I did. Result.
And so, as Todd said, don't panic. I think the critical bit is, if you see the test manager running, then run. It's a bit like the bomb disposal thing. But it's the root cause analysis, and these problems, although the symptom will look like test is failing, on the basis that we've already established here, which is testing as a measurement service, you have got to understand what has failed and then ask why. So I guess another example, we tend to get quite a few calls when test phase is not going as we planned, and so what we start to do is have a look at what the failure points are, see if we have commonality in those, but they do tend, as Todd said, to come back to decisions that were made, or actually not making a decision and allowing something to roll without understanding the context or the complexity or how it may come out in the end, and a lot of that will come back to experience, and it often does not take very long to look at a plan and look at what metrics there are, if there are any, and start to follow that thread back to how did we get here. And this is nothing about pointing fingers at anybody. It is more about how do we unpick that thing to enable us to get back into testing and actually get something delivered. And so, Todd again called it out, absolutely nailed. If you look at payroll integrations, for example, where you tend to go back to, and there's a couple of customers that we've helped through this. If you go back to have a look at the design, it tends to come down to mapping, and it tends to come down to what system is being mapped to, and it tends to come down to what the tool is being used, whether it is a bespoke tool or whether you're actually using Workday connectors, a studio. But that design tends to be the critical piece. And you can make a decision to either test later on to validate what has been built, or in many cases what we will be able to see is we can test to build. So we can pick a set of scenarios that we can run and rerun to start to flush out what those design defects and gaps are, fill those in, and then run ourselves a regression test at the end to make sure that we've delivered it. We could be a lot more agile, I suppose, than waiting for all those things to have happened. So again, it very much depends on the point of where we would be engaged. The challenges that you have got, but if you set up the test strategy in the right way and you've mapped out those milestones and those intersection points between those work streams and don't allow them to drift, you get your scope right on the way in, and you get that nailed, and you have people sign it off. I think I saw someone just flash up the screen there say getting those signatures absolutely critical. When you when you ask people to sign in blood, as it were, not really, but when you get the sign, it absolutely sharpens the senses. They think about what is coming on the way. And so getting that scope nailed, getting people aligned on it, measuring it in the right way, and understanding what the numbers are telling you tends to help you recover that quickly. But there's the other bit that goes around it, which is the conversations that your teams are having, who they're talking to, and how they're talking to them, what you're using at the heart of the governance that surrounds it as well, the meetings that they're having, and where the outcomes of those meetings go to. I mean, one of the the most effective tools that we've ever used is a meeting IPO, an input, a process, and an output. We've got a template that if anyone wants to reach out, they can have it as a freebie. But thinking about the participants in those calls, the inputs that you'll use for those calls, the process that you will go through on that call, and what your expected output is, who's going to use it and why, tends to be really, really good. And so, we're more than happy to share that one with anyone who wants it.
Thank you. Thank you. So you're happy for anyone to reach out to you guys directly, or
yeah, sure thing. Yeah, please. We'll send it to you, and you can go out to the.
I'll share it actually, because I'll be resharing this. So,
sure.
Sadly, guys, we've actually come to an end of our allotted time.
Wow.
It looks like the sun's still out where you are, Rob, specifically, and I know you want to go out and top up that tan.
Oh, indeed. I'm pale blue naturally pale blue, being Irish, obviously.
You're not in Ireland, though, are you?
No, I'm not.
Can you guys just give the attendees a positive final word on testing? Biggest lessons learned, perhaps, from projects.
Yeah, I'll start first. So, a final word on testing. And I think for me, maybe it's my character being more of a low-key character, but it's staying calm in testing. It's a process, and you just follow the process. And it's the same repeatable process, and it doesn't matter from which project you go to. There's always a checklist in testing. There's a rundown. You're always doing your preparations, your entry, exit criteria. You just need to follow the process. And when things go wrong, you just follow the process. There's a process for when things go wrong. And when things go right, same thing. You follow the process. You move into the next stage. But, I mean, test management, for me, what I love about test management is because I'm a people person, right? And projects are all about people. And it's just fun working with teams. With test management, you get to work with all the different work streams. You're talking to functional, technical, you're in PMO, you're engaged everywhere. And if you're on a project that's set up properly, you get to talk to everybody on that project. And you're working with partners and clients. And so for me, that's the fun of test management. And so I would say, I would go back to the human factor. It's the people make the projects. And if you've got good people, good communication, good transparency, and that everyone's engaging with each other, that's where the magic happens. Yeah. You can diffuse situations before they even occur if you've got a repeatable process and you're always engaging and communicating with people.
That's one thing that's really come out in this webinar. It's about the soft skills are so important. Yeah. And I just want to put out there to any customers that may be on the call or any prospects that there are good people out there in the Workday space. It's really tough to find good people with Workday experience, but as you've seen, for the last hour, you've got two really, really strong guys here with real tangible Workday experience. You'd find really tough to find two guys like these two with more experience specifically around test management in the whole market on a global basis. They're not readily available. Do you know what I mean? But there are people out there if you know where to look. And last word from yourself, Rob.
Well, that's very kind of you, first of all, Boyd.
Sorry, say again.
So that was very kind of you. Thanks a million. I would just echo what Todd has said there is, the people make projects, and you may sometimes get more achieved over a cup of coffee than you would in hours of meetings. And if anything, you may have heard of this kind of global pandemic. I don't know if you might have heard of this at the minute. Now, one thing I think has been brilliant about this, and we tend to look for silver linings in things, and that's not to dismiss how heartbreaking this is for hundreds of thousands and millions of people around the world, but from a project perspective, it has kind of underlined the things that we have been saying and we've been practicing for years, and that is putting people first. It's almost the phrase that kind of jumped to mind. It probably sounds a bit cliche, but it's kind of putting the humans back into HR. And you will see when you look past those brands that you've just got people doing their best. You've just got people with their families and their own hopes and fears and dreams and things they're trying to achieve, and juggling lots of stuff, be that family or be that kind of challenging aspects of trying to get a large project delivered. And so there is the reason I say this whole kind of pandemic thing has put the humans back into it is, you will see dogs jumping on people's laps, you will see kids playing in the background and hear them kind of playing PlayStation or slamming doors, and that's okay, because I think a lot of companies are actually embracing the fact that their people are people with lives. And we've been doing this for years and years, which is having that cup of coffee with people and having a chat. We have that mantra of no surprises. This is not about scoring points and dropping hand grenades into meetings. Getting the alignment before you go to that meeting, trusting the process, working with people one-on-one or with teams, tends to be your easiest and best route through, no matter what difficulties a project throws at you. And you tend to meet a lot of good people that way too. So I guess that was my final word on it.
Thank you, Rob. That just brings me to something that happened to me when lockdown first happened, and we was obviously working from home. I've got 3 of these Sphinx cats, so they've all got the same thing as me, right? So they've got no hair, and I'm on the phone talking to a new customer via Zoom video, and one of my Sphinx cats jumps on my shoulder. So this person doesn't know me, and I'm trying to sell the services of Focus Cloud, and I've got this Sphinx, this bald cat on my shoulder. It just as you mentioned, the human side is really, really important. So thank you guys, thank you for attending, and thank you for all of our attendees. The next webinar is going to be on the 16th of July. And on that webinar, I'm going to be joined by 2 really senior professionals from one of the world's most successful Workday partners. So be sure to join in. I will put a video out and maybe put in the invites for the next webinar. And thank you again, Todd and Rob. I can't thank you enough. And thanks for joining.
Thanks for the opportunity. And thanks everyone. Great. Take care.
Very much.
Yep. Have a great day.